interesting. That's only half the pasuk. Meaning, in no place it's not vashel gdi b'chalev imo, entire pasuk by itself. And actually, we have the same pasuk, the exact same pasuk appears twice, both in Mishpatim and Kitisa in Sefer Shmot. It says, "Reishit pikurei atmatcha tavi beit Hashem Elokecha, lo tvashel gdi b'chalev imo." So, what is the connection between bikurim and basar b'chalav? Not immediately apparent, but that is, it appears twice, juxtaposed with the mitzvah of bikurim. And once in Sefer Dvarim, the pasuk is, "Lo tochlu kol nevela, lager asher b'sharecha titnenu v'chala u'machol nochli, ki am kadosh ata l'Hashem Elokecha." Right, the whole first half is all about nevela, not to eat nevela, and then lo tvashel gdi b'chalev imo. So the Rishonim have a few different explanations here as to why the juxtaposition and what the reason is behind basar b'chalav. What is the time? The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim writes something which he writes in a number of places, a similar idea. So he says, if you look at the context of the psukim, you find that this mitzvah is brought in the context of the Shalosh Regalim, in the context of the festivals. What is meat and milk got to do with the festivals? So he says it was the practice of Day Avodah Zarah, that on their festivals they would eat meat and milk together. And the Torah wanted to remove us from this, distance us from these practices of idolatry. He says, this is the Rambam Shita in a number of places, right? Talks about related to korbanot, related to a few other things as well. He actually says, I didn't find this one in the Sifrei Avodah Zarah. I didn't find that this is it's written there that this is their practice, but it makes sense. And therefore that's the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. The Sforno and the Nativ says something similar as well, more maybe related to the connection with Bikurim and the other idea there. They say that the practice of the Avodah Zarah was that they would take a mixture of meat and milk that was cooked together, and they would use that as fertilizer. That was supposed to improve the crops and cause great bounty. And therefore, the Torah tells us not to do that as well. The chiddush is, even if you're using it for the sake of growing crops, not for the sake of eating, that it would be forbidden. Okay, but what comes out, and again, you noticed that on all three places it says lo tevashel. It says do not cook meat and milk together. Nowhere does the Torah explicitly say don't eat meat and milk together, right? But we learn, the Gemara in Chulin goes through different opinions in the Tanaim. The way essentially we paskin is that from the three psukim, we learn out three different prohibitions, right? Not to eat, not to cook, and not to derive benefit. It's all written in the language of Lo Tvashel, because on a Torah level, on a Midoraita level, it's only when it was done derech bishul, meaning meat and milk that was cooked together, that is a Torah prohibition to eat. Meat and milk that was not cooked together, you still cannot eat midrabanan. But so there's a whole discussion. If a cheeseburger, for example, cheeseburger is not kosher, you cannot eat it, right? But so it's hasn't actually been cooked. The place of the meat, the cheese, has been placed on the meat, and maybe that's considered tikkun. It's considered frying. It's not considered cooking. So the whole discussion is that an isur d'oraita or isur d'rabanan. It's definitely forbidden, but it's not. It's maybe not on a d'oraita level. So some of the questions that come up: what if? Right, and again, the Rishonim discuss why is it that the Torah only uses the language of bishul, uses the language of cooking, and not the language of eating or something else. So there are those who understand that it's all based on, as we said, it's got to do with derech bishul. The Rambam, when he writes this, actually does not bring the Gemara. The Rambam writes based on a different limud, which is found in the Midrash. And the way the Rambam writes, he said, how do we know that eating is forbidden? He says that cooking is forbidden. And the Torah didn't have to write eating, because if you can't cook, so kal v'chomer, that you can't eat. And all the Mepharshim say, what kind of a kal v'chomer is that? So they say, one of the interpretations is that it means that why do you cook? You cook in order to eat. So the cooking is sort of the preparation for the eating. So if the achana is forbidden, kal v'chomer, that the actual eating itself is going to be forbidden. And that opens up the question, what if someone is cooking meat and milk, which as we say is a d'oraita prohibition, but not for the same purposes of eating, for a different purpose? It's never intended to be eaten at all. Would that still be an independent prohibition? So there's a case which is brought in Mipnei Arav. It's brought here actually in the name of Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who's the father of Rav Soloveitchik, right? So he says like this. This is brought in Mipnei Arav. Rav Shechter writes, "Maaseh b'student Yehudi באוניברסיטה שהיה שומר מצוות ורצה לדעת אם מותר לו לבשל בשר בחלב שלא לצורך אכילה." You have a student in university, Jewish student from who wants to know, is he allowed to cook meat and milk together, not for the purposes of eating, but for a scientific experiment. Okay, the scientific experiment is not to see, how many calories you'll gain or when you eat it or whatever. A real scientific experiment. So he says, so by Tziyat Shelato Lifnei Halav Moshe Soloveitchik, Veshivo, Tilafi Divrei Rambam Mashma Demotar. So he says, based on the Rambam, you could say that this is permitted. Why? This is what the Rambam says. It says, the only reason why the Torah does not explicitly say you cannot eat meat and milk is because it already said you cannot cook it together. If we've told you that you can't eat, you can't cook it, I don't need to tell you, obviously you can't eat it. So then he quotes here, he says, what is precisely, what is the kal v'chomer? Ma'inyan achila etzel bishul, u'mashma b'pshito, that's what we just explained a few moments ago. He says, you would have to explain, based on this, the Rambam, that cooking is only a prohibition where it's going to be eaten. Like a right? If only you can't cook because that's the preparation for eating, all the more so you would not be able to eat it. However, if we learn that way, he says, mashma lehedya, ein isur b'bishul basar b'chalav, ela b'makom she'oto bishul mashmesh k'achana l'achilato. Therefore, based on the Rambam, the isur, the prohibition of cooking, is only where it's cooking for the purposes of eating. However, מתכוון לעשות עמו ניסוי מדעי, אין איסור. It's just for a scientific experiment, right? There would be no prohibition. Okay, it's a tremendous chiddush. Not everybody agrees. Again, that's only based on one way of understanding the Rambam. There are other ways to learn as well, and there are poskim who disagree. But it's an interesting.
So where forms the chef for non-Jewish people?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question asked if someone is a chef. So the answer is no. Meaning there certainly. Yeah, the only petach that we have, and as I said, even in this shayla, not everybody agrees. But the only reason there you could say that it's allowed for those who are permit is because it's not going to be eaten by anybody, right? Even though a non-Jew has no prohibition for himself of eating meat and milk together. But if I am cooking it for the purposes of eating, then according to everybody would be an independent isur of cooking. And there's also going to be a question in terms of deriving benefit. That may be you're making it to give to somebody else. That may be a sort of benefit as well. There's another question which very, very interesting that Tzitz Eliezer deals with. And he was asked, and this comes up if a person in culinary school, or if a person works in a non-kosher restaurant or something like that, or probably the more common case. So Tzitz Eliezer was asked by a nurse in a hospital. A nurse in a hospital where all the patients are non-Jewish. And the food that they serve, it's not kosher. There's a soup which contains meat and milk together. And is she allowed to serve that, or is that considered deriving benefit from meat and milk? Again, very important to understand. There, she's not doing the cooking, right? She's certainly not doing the eating. But is that considered deriving benefit? Anyway, he has a long discussion. He goes back and forth. His conclusion in that particular instance is that it's permitted, because over there. It's based on a few different things. He says that may not be the benefit, that may not be the definition of benefit. Also, if the meat is not kosher, so it's a nevela, the Rambam writes that, again, it's possible to understand from the Rambam that meat and milk does not apply if the meat is not kosher, if it's a nevela. We don't paskin that way by itself, but he adds that as another consideration. And he says over there, essentially, she doesn't get any benefit. She has no interest in the person eating this meat and milk mixture together. The nurse, from her perspective, would be very happy if the person just ate, whatever else, but there's no interest there in that they eat that particular food. And therefore, based on that and a variety of factors, he says that in that case, it would be permitted, obviously, but the patients are non-Jewish. If the patient is Jewish, that's a different question, and that would be a problem.